My earliest recollection of life is growing up in a family that my dad was a successful businessman. My mum split her time between helping him run the business and being at home as well. And me and I have a sister that's a year and a half younger than me. And we lived in a nice house in its own grounds. My dad was successful. But I do remember they were kind of like weekend party people, so there was always a lot of parties at our house, a lot of people around there. There was a lot of drink and a lot of that sort of stuff going on when I was growing up. My parents weren't religious in it; they were actually pretty anti-religious. But I do remember my grandma when I was young. She was a very committed Christian. She was very devout she was very much all about her faith, and it seemed to, it kind of permeated all of her life. But she was such an amazing person. She was very constant. She was probably the one constant thing in my life that I remember. And, a lot of the time, my early life was kind of quite happy when my parents were together, but also, as well as there being good moments, I do remember they used to row quite a lot, and there was quite a lot of turmoil in the home as well. So there was quite a lot of upheaval. The shift happened. I remember being, like from the age of 8, 9, 10, things were quite good, and then my dad lost his business when I was 11, so we moved down to the Welsh Valleys from the Midlands when I was 11. So through the ages of like 12 to 13, it was difficult. We didn't have any money, and my parents were fighting a lot. My dad got a job abroad then, so we didn't see much of him, and that was really when my parents' marriage collapsed. My dad had met someone else by that time, and he remarried. We moved abroad to Geneva. They tried to save their marriage. He got a really good job, so we went from having a lot to like bad poverty, and then he got a really good job, and we went to live in Geneva for a year, and we lived in this really posh apartment in Geneva. But I think I'd started to become a bit of a problem child by then. I'd started smoking. I'd started to steal my mum and dad's drink when they weren't looking. I'd started drinking at an early age, and even when we were in Geneva. And it was at that point that my mum and dad got divorced, and it was quite it was quite a stark thing that happened. My sister, my mum and I moved back down to Wales, and again we were back in a position where we had nothing. Again, living back down in the Welsh Valleys. My dad, he favoured my sister, and so I felt like I was being rejected, and because of the problems I was creating in the home, I was rejected, and my sister was rewarded. My schoolwork fell apart, but my sister really got her head down in school, and she really tried to make something of herself. As in, today she's a very successful barrister. I became a drug dealer and a drug addict. So, we were like polar opposites really then. I do remember a lot of upheaval, a lot of trauma in the home really. It was very difficult. I think the drinking and the smoking it wasn't just a phase. It was kind of like excuse me. The drinking and the smoking wasn't just a phase. It was kind of a gateway into a path that I really deliberately went down. One of the divorce settlements that my mum and dad came to was that my dad would pay for my schooling. So I was sent off to a posh boarding school. And it was actually at the boarding school where I was introduced to cannabis and introduced to magic mushrooms and to speed and to so-called soft drugs. I was quite young when I started taking drugs. I was like around about 13 years old. I was in boarding school. It was the done thing, and it was something that I did. I felt it to feel accepted. I felt like I was part of a scene that was going on. It was quite exciting, and to start with, it was fun. No, by the time I was 16, I was in a juvenile prison, a juvenile detention centre, and in there it was a bit like a finishing school for criminals, really, at that age. And then when I came out of the detention centre, I started getting involved in dealing drugs. That was at the age of 16. And then for my later teen years, I was very heavily involved in the drug scene. I always said that I wouldn't inject heroin. I always, I kind of drew that as a red line in my life. And I didn't do that until I was 21. But by the time I was 21, I'd gone to prison for selling drugs. I got caught. I went to prison for 5 months. I was in prison. I got acquainted with even worse people then, really. Then when I came out of prison, I moved to a different part of the country to have a fresh start. But I found that I was getting involved with even heavier drugs and an even heavier scene. So by the time I was 21, I was injecting heroin. That was when things really got nasty in my life. I was very lost. I didn't know what to make of my life. I knew that I'd had a lot of opportunities that a lot of people would really love to have, but I'd squandered all of those opportunities, and I just ended up in a mess. I think my dad had washed his hands of me because, even by that time in my life, I hadn't made anything. All of the opportunities that he'd put my way, I'd squandered. So he kind of washed his hands of me. So I had little to no contact with my dad. My mum tried her best for me, but it was difficult for her being a single mum. She used to work hard to put a roof over our heads, but she found it very difficult. And because she worked so hard, she was hardly ever home. So I was kind of left to my own devices. I think something had happened inside of me where I was just it was like very self-destructive. I think I got to a place in myself where I was trying to harm myself, I think, and it was a cry for help, although I would never have admitted it being a cry for help. But the drugs were getting more and more destructive. The behaviour, my behaviour was very destructive. I remember I used to smash things up a lot when I was off my head. I had a lot of anger inside me. I had a lot of rage. There was a lot of sense of shame, and there was a lot of sense of failure in my life as well. And the only kind of antidote to that I could find really was to get more and more off my head with drugs. But they were giving me, at that point, there were still moments in my drug taking where I would be finding kicks, finding excitement. I'd be going to parties, I'd be going to concerts and raves and that sort of thing. But really inside me, there was a lot of sadness, a lot of sense of shame, guilt, because of how my life had turned out. And it was like a slow downward spiral that I didn't really know how to control. Yeah, there was a lot of comparison with my sister. She did really well in law school. She became very successful, and that kind of rubbed salt in the wounds, really, where I was concerned, where my life was going in completely the opposite direction. My sister seemed to be getting more and more successful with work and her life. My life was spiraling out of control and disintegrating. By the time I came to Betel, I'd been a junkie for 20 years. So I started taking heroin at 21. It wasn't until 41 when I got to Betel. But in between that time, it was a cycle of, for the first few years, I was using heroin, and I didn't really feel the need to stop. But after a while, it was after a couple of years when I'd lost most of the good things in my life by then. And I was on this kind of cycle of, I'd do a quick detox, I'd stop taking for a while, I'd try and sort myself out and get a job, but I was never able to hang on to a job very long because the drug taking would start again. And it was it's hard to keep a job when you're a junkie. It's hard to continue as what people call a functioning addict. So I was constantly kind of boom and bust. I would recover, I'd detox, I'd get into recovery, and then before long I would relapse, and then I would be back on that cycle again, and that went on for a lot of years. In that time, I went to a lot of different treatment centres, tried a lot of different things to get clean. I went to psychiatric hospital to detox, which was a pretty horrific experience. And in that time, my sister had become a Christian. And then my mum became a Christian. And I heard that my cousins had become Christians. And all the time, my grandma, who was a Christian in the background, kept saying that she prayed for us every day. And, I wanted nothing to do with organized religion. I absolutely hated it. I didn't see it had any answers for me. It was just something that was designed to spoil people's fun. But the more unraveled my life became, the more I was kind of realized that I was searching for answers. And the drug taking that promised so much, all the parties and that kind of lifestyle that promised so much pleasure, actually delivered the very opposite, where it was just death and destruction in the end. Any kind of enjoyment had long gone. And I remember I was at my mum's detoxing, and my mum was bringing people my own age back from church to talk to me, and I wasn't very pleasant to them. They'd come and try and witness what they'd found they'd found faith, and they kept saying, I found Jesus and I've got a new life. And I was like, oh, great, that's great for you. I just thought they were off their heads. I thought they were mad. And then one day I was in a real mess. I was trying to detox, do a withdrawal at my mum's place. And she brought this guy back from the church to talk to me. And this guy walked in the room, and I didn't know what to expect. This guy told me he'd been a junkie. He told me he'd been, for many, many years, he'd been on the streets, and he'd been a heroin addict. But when he walked in the room, this guy walked in the room, and he was like, there was something about him. He had this, what I call at the time, it was like a bit of an aura. And there was like this guy walked in, and he was glowing, he was happy. He had, he was like full of joy. But also when I heard him talking, he's like, I could tell he really knew the score. And you could see he'd been where I'd been. And now it was hard to imagine that guy as a drug addict, because he was running his own business. He had a nice car, he had a lovely wife and a family, and he just seemed like he'd got it all together. That was the first moment I ever met anyone who'd called themselves a Christian. And I looked at that guy and I thought, wow, whatever that guy's got, then that's exactly what I need. And I couldn't really put my finger on it. And then he asked me if I wanted to pray or if I wanted to become a Christian. I wasn't quite sure about that, but all I knew was I knew that whatever that guy had found or got hold of, I was really up for trying that. So I said a prayer with him. I said sorry for the way that I'd lived my life. That God, if you're real, would you come into my life? Would you change my life? Would you help me? And I didn't give it a great deal of thought. I was just very broken, and I just, I needed help. And I think that was about 5 years after I first started taking heroin. And it was that from that moment I went on this journey. I went to a Christian rehab program. I didn't last very long. I'd just come out of psychiatric hospital. I went to a Christian rehab. It was like I'd landed on the moon or something. I just couldn't get my head around all of this stuff. But there was no denying that the people that I met there, particularly the people that were a bit further on in their recovery, and they were involved in Christian stuff. It was very obvious to me that something very deep had happened to them. So it kind of intrigued me. But at the same time, I looked at Christianity and thought that it was still cutting across my enjoyment and cutting across the things that I would really love to do if I had the chance. If I wasn't hindered by being a drug addict, I had all these things that I'd love to do, but I still didn't quite see Christianity as the answer. And I think, when I look back on it, it was like I went on this, it was 15 years of a tug of war with God. And it was like God wanted me to surrender my life to him, and I wasn't really willing. I had all sorts of trust issues. I didn't really know in my heart that God was good. I'd had so many disappointments in my life. I'd had I looked at the way my dad had abandoned me, and I saw it as a very big betrayal, and I think I projected that onto what I imagined God was like, who I thought he was. I kind of related to God in the same way that I related to my father. So it was very difficult to put my trust in him. I could never bring myself to believe that he actually was good. So there was a lot of, I look on it as a tug of war with God between my will and his will. I prayed the prayer, and I got a deep sense inside myself that something had changed, or something had shifted deep inside myself, but it was very difficult to put my finger on what that actually was. I knew something had happened. It was unmistakable, but I was still left with all of the questions that I had, all of the doubts, all of the fears, all of the uncertainties. So it was a long journey. It was about 15 years of in and out of Christian rehabs. I went to lots of different rehabs. I was in and out of churches. I never really made my Christian walk stick. I was always kind of looking for a way out. I think it was rebellion and a lack of trust, and those kind of things that always led me to relapsing. I think I was scared to let go of control of my life. I don't know why. I look back and it's just crazy. It's the only regret I really have, is that I didn't do it sooner. By the time I got to Betel, I weighed about 7.5, 8 stone. My dad had passed away by that point, and I inherited £30,000 by the time everything was split up. And I spent £30,000 in 6 weeks it was just like an explosion of destruction in my life. So I spent £30,000 on heroin, crack cocaine, hotel rooms, prostitutes, the whole thing. It didn't last me very long. By the time I got to the end of it, I found a friend of mine dead in my flat. I had to get out of town very quickly. I was in a lot of trouble. By this point, my family had tried everything to help me through. And by this point, they just couldn't deal with it anymore. So I wasn't even welcome to go around to my family's house. And I went to the local church, and the pastor, he knew me, he'd known me for years. And he brought me to a place called Betel, which is a Christian recovery community. You can't quite call it a rehab. It's a bit more than a rehab. And I got there. I was in a terrible mess. And I went through withdrawals. I got help through my withdrawal symptoms. I got through that. It took me about 3 weeks to get through my withdrawal symptoms. I wasn't quite sure that I was going to make it. But I remember in that time, It was just like real brokenness at that point, because I'd lost everything and I'd lost everyone. I had no more opportunities or resources I could draw on. It was like everything had finished, and I really was at death's door at that point. I was injecting 10, 15 times a day into my body. I had no veins left in my body. I was just broken, completely broken. And I remember getting on my knees and saying to God, if you will help me, or if you can do anything with what's left of my life, then I will give it to you and you can have it. And I'm not gonna try and run away again, you know. I tried everything by that point. I had nothing left to run away to. I was just completely and utterly sick of the whole thing. And, you know, I just kind of despaired of everything by that point. And that was a real desperation where I truly cried out to God that, you know, if you can do something with my life, then it belongs to you. If I use the analogy that it was like lighting the pilot light on a boiler. Like the pilot light was on, but the gas hadn't come through. And it took a long time to work out how to get the gas through, really. But it did involve brokenness, and it involved, you know, even in that 15 years of tug of war with God, I'd learnt a lot of Christian stuff along the way. I'd had some really great Christian teaching. I learnt a lot about the Bible, and I learnt a lot about the theory of Christianity. It's just I hadn't really opened my heart to it and really reached a tipping point where my life changed, and I really gained momentum. I think after I'd said the prayer that I'd said, and I remember I'd recovered for a bit, and then I'd gone back to the drugs, and I was back in my addiction, and I remember I would go out and I would go robbing, or I'd go stealing, or cheating, committing fraud and all those kind of things. And it was quite devastating because I really felt bad about what I was doing. Whereas in the past, I had no kind of conscience against that sort of stuff. But I found that even when I was committing crime, I really had a sense deep down inside of myself that this is really wrong and I shouldn't be doing this. But all the time, the addiction was driving me to do it. So I was really kind of tormented and torn between two worlds, really. I have a really great relationship with my family now. I'm in constant contact with them. You know, they love what's happened to my life. You know, they can't get enough of me now. They even phone me up for advice on stuff. Whereas, you know, I was a big part of the problem before, and now people will phone me up for advice and to see if I have any pearls of wisdom these days. I remember getting banned from a big supermarket chain for shoplifting. And then after I came to Betel, I was in one of my roles was being in charge of the public relations and the fundraising. And I was invited to go down to the head office of this supermarket chain. And I had breakfast with the board of directors, met the CEO, and they were asking me for advice on how they could help charities and how they could put together a food donation program. It was kind of surreal, really, that I'd gone from being banned from the supermarket chain to I'd actually had breakfast, dinner and supper with the board of directors at different events. And I know a lot of the people down at the head office there. Another one was, you know, I was always on the run from the police when I was in my addiction. And a few years ago, I spoke at the National Police Convention, which was interesting. There was a queue of policemen waiting to talk to me. It's not the first time there's been a queue of coppers looking to talk to me, but this time it was for good reasons. But I've been on Songs of Praise. And that was to do with the tree work that I did. When I came to Betel, I learned how to work, learned how to relate to people, learned a lot of business skills. So I've run 3 different businesses for Betel, and I'm also head of public relations and fundraising as well. So I get to meet some really, really interesting people. You know, my life is just so different these days. It really is. It's just so full of good things. Right now in Betel, I'm head of pastoral care over the men in the Birmingham Centre. So that's 3 different houses with up to 20 guys in each house. And I oversee all of their pastoral care, which is incredible, really, because you wouldn't have trusted me to, you know, I couldn't have been trusted to look after a hamster before. And here I am looking after 3 men's houses in the Betel organisation, which is fantastic. And I'm able to draw from my own experience. I'm able to draw from the way that I've been able to really tackle my problems, my issues, the pain that I went through when I was younger, the rejection, the abandonment, really, all of that stuff that really impacted me and affected my life. And I've been helped. You know, I've had so many great people in my life that have helped me through this. And they were all people that have overcome it themselves. And now I've overcome those issues. You know, I've been clean for nearly 16 years now. I'm able to draw on a lot of experience to help people. You know, I don't have any letters after my name, but I am an expert in what I do. I look at the world around me. I look at the beauty and the wonder of creation around me. And I just never really bought into the idea that was all here by accident. But I spent a lot of my life trying to find out what that meant, or how I could access what was the power or the intelligence behind it. But when I started reading the Bible and really from an open heart, asking God to speak to me, He would speak to me through the Bible, and then I would find myself applying those truths to my lives, I'd find myself applying the words in the Bible to my life, and I found that they started to change me. They started to change who I am. And I realized that through the Bible that God was actually speaking to me in a way that was making a noticeable difference in my life. You know, the Bible talks about peace. It talks about joy. It talks about having a purpose. It talks about having a hope and having a future. And I think the Bible was the greatest means of communication with God. But I know, you know, He speaks to the quiet of my heart as well. And because of the change that's come about in my life, I have no hesitation of doubt that He is real, and that He's not only is He real, but He's actually intimately interested in me and interested in my life as well. I would say it's good to get with other Christians. That is really the help. I would say if you could find yourself a good, lively, happening church, and go and talk to some people in there. You know, keep an open mind, keep an open heart, and go and talk to people whose lives have changed, and just go and get to know them and ask them, what is it that has changed their life? I know that the only thing that changed my life was the power of God. But that power is demonstrated in a very practical way that's very accessible. It's very, very real. And the reason I say that is because of the change that has brought about in my life, where I find myself being kind to people. I'm interested in people. I want to help people. I feel very driven to do that. because in the past it didn't bother me that I would hurt people or that I would steal from people or I'd rob people. I really back in the old days I didn't really care about that. Now my conscience, it's like my conscience has been made alive. I know this is real because something has happened inside me. And what I now understand that to be is that Jesus promises that he'll put his spirit inside of me and that will change me and I'll become more and more like him. Betel UK is an organisation that is set up to help people who have completely lost their way in life. And usually that means drugs, it means alcohol, it means homelessness, it means losing families, broken relationships. So in Betel, I found freedom from addiction and I found help to heal the broken areas of my life. And then I learned a lot of skills, a lot of work skills and a lot of practical life skills in Betel that really stood me in good stead to make something of my life. One of the amazing joys about the work I do in Betel is watching other people come through, seeing someone come in the doors completely broken, their lives smashed to bits, and then watching them change and transform, watching them not just overcome their drug addictions, but watching them learn new skills, learn life skills, learn family skills, learn how to become husbands, fathers. It really is incredible to see that. And I think that's why I stuck around, really, because I don't think there's any other job that could offer you the satisfaction of doing those kinds of things.